Morning and happy Wednesday. Today we are going to be going over the May 20th portion of the distance learning packet where we're going to have some reading, and again we're going to ask that you read for 15 minutes either using a book of your own, a foldable book from the back of the packet, or an online resource you have. We're going to be introducing a new story which is also a procedural text just like we had yesterday. This one is called From Pine Tree to Pizza Box, where you're going to read the first 3 pages aloud. And then you're going to work together to outline the cardboard making process. So again, when you're outlining that process, you're sequencing events in the order that they happen. What happened first, what happened next, what happened finally, telling the story of the process of the cardboard being made. Then we're going to follow that up with some writing, where your writing prompt is, what are the steps it takes to make cardboard? Write about the steps. We're going to have a little bit of grammar practice, where we're going to capitalize geographic names, and then we're going to end it with some math, where we have a math task, and then a little bit of procedural practice, where we are going to continue that multi-digit subtraction. So let's go ahead and get started. After you've read for the 15 minutes, it wants you to read the first 3 pages of From Pine Tree to Pizza Box. So this is what you're going to be reading, those pages here. And again, like I was saying, it's a procedural text where it's talking about how something is made. So you're going to sequence those events. You're going to retell the process. What happened first to get from Pine Tree to Pizza Box? What happened? What was the next step? And then the next step, and then the next step, to finally see that process through. So you're going to read that, talk about those steps with your child. So again, students, you can either read this with a parent or with a sibling, but make sure you're talking about that process. What were the steps they went through to go from Pine Tree to Pizza Box? And we call that sequencing because you're telling it in order. You're going to give us those steps in sequential order. Okay, so once you are done with the reading and then discussing that, you're going to move on to writing, where again I've given you another outline here with your writing prompt. What are the steps it takes to make cardboard? I've given you a initial starter sentence here, and then I've given you the transitional words to start to outline those steps, and then I've given you the conclusion. And remember, whenever we're writing that conclusion, we're basically restating that topic sentence, that initial sentence there, using different words. And as you can see here, our initial sentence was, there are many steps it takes to make cardboard. Then you're going to list those steps. I just gave 3. If there are more than 3, you can add some more transitional phrases in there with some additional sentences. And then our conclusion is, these are all the steps you would have to take to make cardboard. As you can see, I used a lot of the same words. I just changed it up a little bit for our conclusion. So make sure you're just filling in that information for the outline, using a capital letter at the beginning of a sentence, and making sure we add that punctuation at the end. And if you follow these steps, that's going to give you a good 1, 2, 3, 4, at least 5 sentences, which is a really, really good paragraph. After you are done with your writing prompt, you are going to move on to your spelling and grammar, where we are going to capitalize geographic names. Geographic names of specific places are proper nouns. Each word in a geographic name should begin with a capital letter. So as you can see here, these are some really popular geographic names. We have the Brooklyn Bridge, we have North Carolina, and we have San Francisco. As you can see, each letter in each word is capitalized because it's a geographic name, making it a proper noun. So here it wants us to circle the geographic name in each sentence, then write it correctly on the line. So we will go over 1, 2, and 3, and then I'm going to want you to try the rest on your own. So going over number 1, I am going on a trip to Charlottesville. Okay, Charlottesville is going to be the geographic name, so we are going to come in here, and we are going to make sure that Charlottesville is capitalized. Okay, so as you can see, I took our geographic name and I capitalized it, and then we are going to need to draw a circle around that. So make our little circle here. need to make that a little bit smaller, and then we need to circle Charlottesville. So it says circle the geographic name in each sentence and then write it correctly on the line. And I'm going to make a couple more of those so we can do 2 and 3 together. Okay, number 2. It is a city in the state of Virginia. Well, here, Virginia is our geographic name. So I'm going to circle that. And when I write that on the line, Virginia is going to be capitalized. Just like that. All right, and then I will go over number 3 with you. I went hiking in the Rocky Mountain National Park. Wow, that is a big one. So here I'm going to come and the geographic name, I'm going to move my little circle over. The geographic name is Rocky Mountain National Park. All 4 of those words is going to be circled because that is a geographic name, just like up here, Brooklyn Bridge. Bridge is capitalized because it is in the name. So Rocky Mountain National Park, that whole entire thing is going to be capitalized. So the R in Rocky, the M in Mountain, the N in National, and the P in Park. So I'm going to go ahead and get started. So it should look like Rocky Mountain National Park. And let me stretch that up for you. So that's what that should look like. Each of the words in that are capitalized. I'm going to want you to try 4, 5, 6, and 7 on your own. Just remember you're circling the geographic name and then you are rewriting it with a capital letter. All right, so let's go ahead and get started with some math. Our May 20th math task, it's asking us to solve the following equation. 700 minus 97, and then explain how you solved it. Well, as you can see, it was written out a little bit different, so I had to rewrite that based on the place value, making it a little bit easier to solve. I lined my 1s up with my 1s, I lined my 10s up with my 10s, and then 700 had 100, but 97 did not have 100, so that's why that is blank. So let's go ahead and get started. Always, if we follow those steps, we're always starting with the 1s column. Here we have 0, and we want to take 7 away from that. Well, if you have 0 of something, you cannot take 7 away. So what we always do is go next door. Well, there's also a 0 here. So what we need to do is we're going to have to borrow twice before we can actually find the difference of the 1s column. So the first place we're going to borrow from is the hundreds. I'm going to grab one of these bars here. We're going to, that 7, because we need to borrow it, that 7 is going to become a 6 because we have borrowed 100. All right, and then that is going to come next door, meaning that the 10 is, or the 0, now we need to borrow, the 10 rather, sorry, or 0 is going to become a 10 because we have borrowed from that. We've borrowed from the hundreds to make a 10. Now we can borrow from the 10 and make that, and get enough to borrow from the 1s to be able to subtract that column. So now that we've made enough there, the 10 is actually going to become a 9, and this 0 over here, so this is going to become a 9 now, because we had to borrow again. Oops, sorry about that. This is going to be a 9, and this will become a 10. Okay, now we can subtract our 1s column. We have 10 and we need to take 7 away. So if you have 10 of something and you take 7 of those, you are going to have 3 left. All right, that is step 1. Now we can move on to step 2 where we are going to subtract our 10s column. Well, we have 9 of something. Remember, we borrowed from the hundreds. That turned into a 10, but then we needed to borrow we need to borrow for our 1s column, so that's where that became a 9. So 9, and then we take 9 away, we know that is 0. Because if you have 9 of something and you take all of them away, you are left with nothing. Then we can move on to step 3 where we are moving over to our hundreds column where we have 6 minus There's nothing there, so there's nothing to subtract. So we're just bringing that 6 all the way down. So we know 700 minus 97 is 603. And it wants us to explain how you solved it. Well, I put a little explanation down here. We solved by regrouping. This allowed us to be able to subtract each place value to find the difference. Because we had to regroup each place value, that gave us enough to finally solve and find the sum, which gave us the overall difference. So let's go ahead and move on to a little bit of procedural practice. But before we do that, we have an example where it's going to break it down into steps for us, explaining what to do in each column of the place value. Where we are going to, this example is we're going to find the difference of 652 minus 429. And remember, you can always draw those base 10 blocks if that helps you, but also make sure that you're lining it up by place value so that you can show your work. All right, step 1, we're going to subtract the ones. Remember, when adding or subtracting, we always start with those ones. You cannot subtract 9 from 2. You need to regroup 110 as 10 ones. So just like they did here, we're going to borrow from next door. That 5 becomes a 4, and because we borrowed 10, we're turning 10 of those 10s into a 1. The 2 is going to become a 12. Remember, both of these numbers are being changed. So make sure you're changing both of them. Whenever you borrow, you're taking one away and you're adding it somewhere else. Okay, that is step 1. So step 2, we are going to subtract the 10s. Moving over to the 10s column, no longer, that's why we crossed the 5 out. Remember, we borrowed, that became a 4. So we're no longer going to use the 5. Take the 4, we're taking 2 away. If you have 4 of something, you take 2 away, you are left with 2. So that is step 2. And then finally, you're going to move on to step 3, where you're subtracting the hundreds. If you have 6 of something and you take 4 away, you are left with 2. So the difference of 652 minus 429 is 223. And remember, when we move on to the procedural practice, if you get stuck or you can't remember a step, you can always pause the video on this slide, or you can rewind and go back and rewatch. All right, so let's go ahead and move on with a little bit of practice. All right, so we need to subtract. Remembering those steps, we're always going to start with the 10s. Here, or I'm sorry, we're always going to start with the 1s and then move on to the 10s and then on to the 100s. So we always start right and work our way left. Okay, so we have 6 minus 7. Well, if you have 6 of something, you cannot take 7 away because you don't have enough. So we know we are going to need to regroup. And when we regroup, we borrow from next door. So here we're going to borrow from the 10s, where the 4 is going to become a 3. And that means now that this 6 is going to become a 16. And now that gives us enough to subtract 7 from 16. So remember, when you're subtracting, put 7 in your head, and then you're going to count on your fingers up to 16. Stopping when we get to 16, and then however many fingers you're holding up, that's the difference. So 7 in your head, starting with counting on your fingers, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, stop. You should have 9 fingers up, so the 9 goes down. They're below the 1s column. All right, that was step 1. Now we're going to move on to step 2, where we're going to subtract the 10s column. We have 3 of something and we need to take 1 away. We're not going to need to regroup because if you have 3 of something and you take 1 away, you will have 2 left. 2 up. Okay, and then step 3, we're moving on to the hundreds, where we have 5 and we're not taking anything away. So we're just going to bring that 5 down. And the difference of 546 and 17 is 529. Let's go ahead and try number 2 for some more practice. Just remember that if we're following those steps, we're always starting with that 1s column. And here we have 3 minus 9. If you have 3 of something, you cannot take 9 away. So we know we are going to need to regroup. We're going to borrow from right next door, where that 8 is going to become a 7 because we're borrowing 1. And then that's going to mean that that 3 is going to become a 13. Because remember, we're adding the tens. The tens that we borrowed here, we're adding to the ones. So we have 13 minus 9. Now we have enough. So if you put 9 in your head and you count up to 13, that's going to give us the difference. So you have 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. Stop. You should have 4 fingers being held up. That tells us that that difference is 4. And now we're able to move next door. We finished step 1. Step 2 is we are going to subtract the tens column. We have 7 of something and we are going to take 3 away. 7 is greater than 3, so we know we are not going to need to regroup. 7 minus 3 is 4. We're going to bring that 4 down. And our third and final step is subtracting the hundreds. We have 7 minus 4. If you have 7 of something and you take 4 away, we are left with 3. So we know the difference of 783 and 439 is 344. So I'm going to want you to try 3 and 4 on your own. If you have any questions, do not hesitate to reach out to me on ClassTag or leave me a message in the comment section below and I will get back to you. It looks like that is all we have for today. I hope you all have a wonderful day and we will talk soon. Goodbye. What do you